Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And day one has just concluded with all of those massive class changes that just swept through. And I wanted to give you my thoughts, my initial reactions to day number one, what I've observed from other players, my own personal experience, and kind of take a quick, fun little look at what some of the data and analytics are saying as far as some of the class popularity and representation moving forward with this patch, given how big these changes actually looked on paper. So the first thing that we can see is that this breakdown of the graph is showing like when certain hotfixes came into play, and you can see the trajectory of Shadow Priest was already on the up, and then it got its buffs and it just went up through the roof. Fell a little bit at times, and I think these are probably like the tournament upticks, and it was at a skyrocketing high over every other specialization when it comes to solo shuffle PvP. However, right here is when the Beast Mastery Hunter changes got noticed, and look at that jump. It went from like kind of bottom, lower bottom, all the way up here, and Shadow Priest immediately dropped. So my guess is that these players that were playing Shadow Priest, they're the bottom rerollers. So they just all switched to BM Hunter to play BM Hunter. And then as the changes came through, you can see that it's a bit of a decline, right? We saw nerfs to Beastmaster Hunter, nerfs to Shadow Priest. We didn't see Elemental Shaman jump nearly as high. And I actually think Elemental Shaman was probably better than Beastmastery Hunter, ignoring that possibly some of these players were exploiting the bug that was going on. I was surprised Elemental Shaman didn't jump higher than this, but it did get a little bit of a bump with the change coming through, and then came down a little bit as well. And then Feral Druid, surprisingly, has just remained, towards the top end, but not to any sort of extreme level either. I think a lot of players were expecting it to fall off. Again, I think these guys playing Feral, where this fall off is probably because they're the bottom rerollers, because they switched maybe over to Ellie or BM Hunter as well, because there's a bit of a drop off. But then Feral had an uptick again. And I think this is following in line with my initial thoughts, my initial reactions to the patch is basically that the game is definitely improved. I enjoyed my experience yesterday. I played Balanced Druid for like upwards of 7 hours or something like that straight in solo shuffle. As far as like meta defining changes, I don't know if it's really hit too significant of a change overall. I think we need more time to really decide that. Some specializations definitely feel worse in this patch, and I think actually one of those is actually Holy Paladin. So I think if we put up the healers here on the chart, you'll see Holy Paladin starts to get a pretty significant drop, and my expectation is it's probably going to continue on a downward trend. Disc Priest still remaining in a solid spot as would be expected with the changes that came through for it, and Mistweaver coming up on the rise is definitely important to note. And I think Resto Shaman is actually one of the more sleeper healers at the moment. I got Resto Shaman a lot against Holy Paladin in situations where Holy Paladin normally beats Resto Shaman with like Hunters and Rogues, and Resto Shamans are winning a lot more frequently. I do think Resto Shaman improved a lot. You might not think so, right? Because they just buffed their casted healing, but if you're playing Farseer, it gives you Nature Swiftness, which lets you access those casted heals, and it makes it more guaranteed that you get a target to full health when you use it, and you can use it every 30 seconds. So it's actually a very big increase to their overall kind of like burst recovery that they didn't have. They'd kind of normally be struggling just trying to keep people alive spamming Riptides. So I think Resto Shaman is greatly improved. Mistweaver is greatly improved. Holy Priest, I don't think it's going to change too much, unfortunately, even with some of your buffs some of your spells getting like 20% buffs. I don't think it's enough really to kind of pull it up from the floor just yet. Preservation Evoker seems to be trending downward, which is honestly surprising because when I see it, it still looks really solid. So I don't know if this is just a matter of Paladin was so good that all the healers felt like if they weren't playing Paladin, they had to switch, and that's why this is trending down, and maybe that won't be the case now, because I think Paladin is definitely going to be coming down from its all-time high a little bit earlier here as Holy. And I think the healer balance, aside from Holy Priest, is getting a lot closer than it has in previous patches. You can see the win rates also improved for Mistweaver. I was expecting it to be kind of God tier. I don't know if it's complete God tier after they did the last second nerfs after I made my tier list specifically. Win rates coming down for almost all healers. Paladin most significantly. I mean, it's coming in at 57%, which is crazy. Holy Priest surprisingly dropped dramatically given the changes that came through it, a 10% loss in win rate. So maybe the other healers getting buffed, like Mistweaver and things like that, has definitely put kind of like a wrench in their plan or something like that. But that's a big drop off in win rate overall for Holy Priest. So Holy Priest kind of want to avoid. Paladin's getting put definitely more in line, and a lot of other healers are starting to see a bit of a rise and a resurgence, I think, thanks to those Holy Paladin nerfs. Now, when we look at melee DPS specifically, Feral Druid still feels really strong. I think that it's still definitely in the top tier, but I'm glad that they looked at, the two things that were making it really strong, which is mobility, self-healing, and its incarnation cooldown. I think all those nerfs were right in the right direction. I kind of think it needs to play out more as to whether or not it really needs to be nerfed any further beyond from this point, or how significant it would need to be nerfed from this point, but I think it's fallen into a really good spot. Ret Paladin saw a bit of a jump with 11.0.5 with the buffs to Templar once they got them working, but I wouldn't say that Ret is like superb. Most of the Rets that I got in my lobbies last night were really struggling in terms of just like overall pressure that they could create in the game. So I could see Ret Paladin definitely getting a little bit more love moving forward as far as PvP tuning is concerned. Enhancement Shaman is still looking strong, I think, even despite the changes to Voltaic Blaze. Obviously, you lost pretty significant amount of burst damage on this patch, but I think you can still run the Stormbringer, and you can still play the totemic build of Enhancement Shaman and still do really well. Assassination seems to still be doing really decently well, even despite the minor nerf for it. Demon Hunters, I was honestly surprised you didn't get any attention at all. Your win rate's falling a lot, it seems like, in most recent times. No attention at all. Demon Hunters, it's going to be a bit of a rough ride, specifically. Subtlety Rogue as well. I've seen some rogues, and I don't know if this is propaganda from rogues or not, because sometimes rogues, when they're strong, they try and hide that they're strong so they can do well in tournaments and things like that. Some rogues, I've seen clips of hitting 5 million bursts, but then they looked at that with flagellation, so maybe you're not hitting that. I didn't see a lot of Subtlety Rogue, and this is one of the ones that's really hard to actually navigate around how strong it is. I need to get more data on this to really see like what happened to Subtlety Rogue and whether or not it's actually in a horrific position. I think I got one yesterday that wasn't like a streamer rogue that would have like other biases towards specialization, and it didn't feel awful. It still felt like it had very strong win conditions. A smoke bomb, shadowy duel, still really hard to pull off in shuffle, which is probably why the win rate's coming down a bit here in shuffle. Outlaw, though, saw a pretty big bump, and I think a lot of people were talking about that, like potentially re-rolling to Outlaw given the assassination nerfs, the changes to subtlety, and their win rate has actually gone up quite a lot, a 6% increase in recent times here, from 50% to 55%. So that is definitely a big improvement for Outlaw, even though you didn't really get, I don't think you've got any changes. And this is the thing, right? Like, even if you don't make changes to the game, there's so much to discover. And honestly, maybe like the nerfs to subtlety and the nerfs to Asa got people to try Outlaw, and then suddenly, hey, it's not even actually that bad. So for a lot of times when you're watching like an analysis video or a tier list video, you should take into consideration that there is a lot of potential that has not been tapped on a lot of specializations. And I think when Conquest uncaps, I think in like about 3 weeks or so, and everyone can start playing alts and get alt gear and re-gear and stuff like that and play more things, that you're going to really see like an expansion possibly in terms of what is meta and what isn't meta. I saw Frost Death Knight posting about being the rank 1 Death Knight, even higher than Unholy Death Knights is Frost. So again, if you want to make a niche specialization work, you absolutely can, because I think for a lot of people, they consider Frost Death Knight like maybe the weakest melee DPS overall, but if you really dedicated to it, want to make it work, want that underdog experience, you definitely can. But obviously it's kind of on a bit of a downward trend, but it's not to say that it is impossible to make it happen. Feral Druid, a little bit of a downward trend, but again, it still felt really strong. Survival is just held decently, I'd say, overall. Windwalker as well, just holding decently, even despite the minus 5% win rate. I'm curious as to what is actually contributing to that specifically. It's probably like the influx of maybe Ellie Shamans and Hunters, because they can kite Windwalkers so effectively, and even possibly mages. And then where's Arms Warrior? I just skipped totally right past. I feel like this is the one that everybody really wanted to know about, was Arms Warrior. So its win rate technically down a little bit, but its participation rate has gone up a lot by 4.33%. I fought against Smexen, I think, in a shuffle lobby. I fought against a couple of Warriors. Damage felt better. Still feels like it's pretty manageable. It just felt like it was in a solid spot. I don't think it's going to necessarily overtake Feral Druid as far as like tournament level play, but as far as like the experience of the latter, I think it's in a lot healthier of a spot than it was before getting these buffs. And Fury Warrior is kind of the same. Unholy DK, you guys are just really trending downwards though. I would really like to see like a stimulus package for Demon Hunters and for Unholy Death Knights, and even Frost Death Knights to a certain extent, just increasing some of their sustained damage abilities. Because I think defense is reasonably fine for Death Knight. Maybe defense could go up a tiny bit for Demon Hunter, but their damage, like for Demon Hunter to be viable, they kind of need to do quite a lot more damage than other specs. And I think right now they're kind of just riding the line at basically being the same as most other specs. As far as ranged is concerned, this graph looks wild. Again, we talked about it at the beginning with the BM hunters replacing the shadow priests, but mage as well. So mage was having a tough time with all the hunters, but I don't think that's going to change because they did last second changes to LE. And I'll tell you right now, elemental shaman is still blasting. BM Hunter is still blasting. Shadow Priest is still blasting. Although I'd say they're more reasonable. I think that they're definitely pulled more in line. But I think for ranged, it's about kind of like pulling the bottom up. I feel like specs like Arcane and Fire are definitely still struggling. Boomkin feels better. I feel like they've done a good job with the changes for Destro Lock. I think Destro has also improved significantly. Demo's improved significantly. Affliction still holds a really strong position, even despite, the win rate fluctuations like this. I'm just talking from personal experience from what I saw. It feels like those specializations are doing still really well, except Marksman. Marksmanship Hunter, I think, is really struggling. It's going to need a lot of help. Like it's falling 0.26% on win rate. The removal of the aim shot rapid fire damage increasing talent has made them just feel like they are not competitive aggressively. So Marksman, Fire Mage, Arcane Mage, I'd say are like the ones that are standing up the most as far as range DPS that could use a little bit of a stimulus package. Defense changes for Boomkins. They definitely were felt. I feel like Boomkin struggles with multiple casters, which is honestly where it struggled before. Boomkin was kind of always like the anti-melee. You got Roots and Cyclones and Bear for high armor, and it's kind of its niche has been to be like an anti-melee caster. And then when you get dot classes like Shadow Priests and Warlocks, you kind of struggle there because they've got self-sustain that's better than yours and a little bit higher overall sustain. So maybe it's kind of fine where it's slotting into the meta, but if you're not a Moonkin main, like it's probably going to be like feel like B tier, but if you are dedicated to Moonkin, absolutely I think you can make it feel like it's more like A tier. But that's basically my assessments. Quick little summary of it is that Warriors are definitely better. I think the balance has definitely improved overall between all the specializations. So I think it's a really good time to jump into the game. And as long as they continue to be ongoing, working, iterating on feedback moving forward, I think the game could likely get into a really good position. As honestly, I'm having a lot of fun even with it as it is. And I think it's just going to continue into getting into a really good position as long as they can keep up with what they've been doing, basically. So other than that, thank you guys for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed this analytical deep dive, and I will see you in the next one.